Coming soon to a bedside table near you. Pity the Bathtub, Its Forced Embrace of the Human Form, a collection of poetry by Mathia Harvey. With cameos by Ornamental, In Defense of Our Overgrown Garden, The Gym is on page 64, and Letting Go. In this epic collection, Harvey creates poetry from vision. She draws from music, conversations, images, and painting. Whitney Maulsby, student poet and newly established workshop guru, gives it 2 thumbs up. Author and main character Mathia Harvey was born in Germany, grew up in England, and eventually moved to Milwaukee with her family. She attended Harvard for undergrad and studied creative writing. She then attended the University of Iowa to further her writing education. Various collections of poetry written by Harvey include Pity the Bathtub and Its Forced Embrace of the Human Form, Sad Little Breathing Machine, Modern Life, Of Lamb, and If the Tabloids Are True, What Are You? Mathia Harvey now lives in Brooklyn, New York. She's still impacting the modern poetry pop culture of today. I found that she has recently performed at the International Center of Photography in New York City. Her performances also extend to the classroom. She's currently a professor of undergraduate and graduate studies at Sarah Lawrence College. Future projects include a special collection of poems that will include images and/or illustrations, a nod to the popularity of graphic novels in recent years. Now, let's get down to business. All lights, cameras, and action aside, Harvey has created some very unique and intriguing poems within this collection. Before I share those poems with you, I'd like to give you some tools to help you navigate through Harvey's techniques. As far as I can tell, Harvey is a postmodern poet who pieces together random phrases with no true narratives or framed stories. She focuses more on the surface of events. She breaks free from many of the rules that have been set for more typical poetry. In her book review, Cynthia Hogue says that Harvey tends to, quote, disregard aesthetic boundaries of various poetic schools, end quote, to join the group of more modern poets who want to give their own perceptions of the world and not perceptions of the past. Oftentimes, Harvey uses what is called a disrupting narrative. This surrealist technique makes the poem appear to have been written by several different individuals who don't know what the others are writing about. Her poems investigate a vision. Many times she is explaining something she can see. At other times, she is describing a painting or work of art. And on the rare, wonderful occasion, she invents worlds that alter what we all can see. To learn more about Harvey's poetry from Harvey herself, visit Katona Poetry Series online and check out her interview with Andy Kuhn. Let's take a closer look at her famous poem, Pity the Bathtub, Its Forced Embrace of the Human Form. Like most of her poems, Harvey writes in prose. The lines are long and unvaried in length. Her lack of punctuation is obvious and purposeful. We stop and start because we are unsure of when we are supposed to stop and start. This adds dimension because we are forced to read and reread until we understand her intended meaning. Each line starts with a capital letter, which allows us to view them as a single syntactical unit or to consider them within the larger scheme of the poem. Sometimes the lines make sense in standing alone, and sometimes they cause confusion. One technique I love is Harvey's use of what she calls swivel lines or hinges. This is where she uses the last word or words of the line as a possible first word or words for the next line. She claims this technique is a machine that is, quote, creating a magnetic enjambment which holds the poem together, end quote. As you can see in 3 lines from the poem here, this can be read in 3 different ways. The queen does not have lovers she obeys her mother, or her mother once told her your ancestry is your only support. Another example from later in the poem allows us to read it as make room for his breath, or his breath quickens at night as he dreams of her. What an interesting technique that works so well when the reader accepts the challenge of interpreting what is intended. This statement from the Poetry Foundation makes sense for many of Harvey's poems. Quote, Harvey could have written this poem in a conventional way, but if she had, I don't think I would have responded to it with as much enthusiasm. I believe the form works to elevate the words that make up the poem, adding layers for the reader to uncover, making the reader's experience of reading the poem a richer one." End quote. I definitely agree. After analyzing her poetry throughout the week, I've learned to appreciate how hard I sometimes have to work to piece together her ideas. Not only does her unique use of prose make understanding slightly difficult, but her lack of rhythm, rhyme, and punctuation make the poems move at such a rapid pace in my initial reads. However, when I slow myself down to appreciate her techniques, I find a beautiful repetitive movement that I create as the reader, and it rocks me back and forth in comfort. This way of reading does make for a rich experience that I appreciate more when I've come to a conclusion of my own. Touching briefly on other poems, I can see so many similarities and also a few surprises. Prose poetry is the trend with long lines that usually have unvaried lengths. I find her hinging technique frequently. Here is another example from the poem Letting Go. As you can see within these 3 lines, we can read it 2 possible ways. He expected them to swim at a slant or to detect a dizziness in the daisies, or the daisies were partly covered by a late snow. I also see a slight difference in letting go with the line length and poem length. Here, Harvey chooses to shorten lines and finish after only 18 lines. This leaves a large amount of white space at the bottom of the page and is unlike many of her lengthier poems. I almost wonder if this is intentional in keeping with the theme of the poem. As he lets go and climbs up into the sky, the poem abruptly ends. In the poem, The Gem is on page 64, I see a more clever play on words than I've seen throughout other poems of Harvey's. I love how she plays up rapture and rupture so close together. It gives the poem energy at the right moment. She also follows it up quickly with the repetitive use of looking to create a play on words. I like this subtle use of word choice to make sure the reader is paying attention. One thing I notice in the poem, In Defense of Our Overgrown Garden, that varies from other poems is Harvey's turn from speaking about a scene to speaking to an individual. In defending the garden, she first describes how others might see this disorderly yard, and then speaks directly to possibly a significant other in a tender and loving way. She even ends the poem by saying, "I love you." The outlier in this book is the poem Ornamental, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Harvey strays from her typical long-lined, boxy prose format and chooses to use the concrete form. Obviously, the shape is that of an ornament, but why this poem? At first, I noticed that she uses shorter lines to talk about winter, and I thought that might relate to the bare basics of nature when everything is frozen over. But she also uses short lines again at the bottom of the poem when discussing summer. Maybe it's because he has cut away any extra from the tree, and the tree has given in? Then I came to believe, and I could be wrong, that the poem is all about the man's comfort. He must have boundaries. He must be in control. Therefore, Harvey must give the poem boundaries. She must give it edges and shape it neatly. Then, a revelation. Is she mocking more traditional poetry here? Is she calling out those who stay inside the boundaries? Those that put their poetry on display as merely a shiny ornament that's been shaped by history and rules? Those who are afraid to take risks and describe their perceptions, their visions, their true selves? Just when you think you know Harvey, she throws in a curveball. I have a few ideas for possible writing prompts, and I'd love to see some of you tackle these challenges. First, you could create a poem using the swivel line or hinge technique to challenge the reader into, quote, creating a magnetic enjambment which holds the poem together, end quote. Or you could create a poem using the disrupted or non-linear narrative technique. This surrealist technique makes the poem appear to have been written by several different individuals who don't know what the others are writing about. It could be out of chronological order or random statements that seem to be somewhat thrown together in a disorderly fashion. Audiences everywhere, now's your chance to check out an author who can show you how to share your own perception of the world through various representations of what you and others see. Check out Mathia Harvey's Pity the Bathtub, Its Forced Embrace of the Human Form. Break free from the pressures to follow certain poetic rules. Use postmodern prose to give audiences the freedom to interpret as they wish. And use beautifully placed hinges to challenge audiences to find a rhythm of their own. Mathia Harvey, coming soon to a poetry workshop near you.